You are listening to Book Clips, a podcast where authors and narrators expose you to excerpts from different books. You can find the show and more by searching for The Lesbian Talk Show on iTunes, Podbean, or Stitcher.
This is Adan Ramie reading a section from my book, Maladaptation. Chapter 4. Lee stopped, her hands on her knees, and fought the rising bile in her stomach. Josie skidded to a stop beside her. He clutched his side, panted, and stared into the still darkness behind them. Lee glanced back too and searched the streets for any sign of Eddie and his cronies. Everything was still, and she dropped her head back down to suck in a great, shaky breath. "The hell did you do, Josie?" She punctuated her words with gasps and tried to calm the erratic beating of her heart. He shook his head and squeezed a stitch in his side. "I didn't mean to. I was going to a party to look for Johns, and I made the mistake of telling Eddie." He took another deep breath and blew it out slowly. "He sent me with a bunch of prepackaged blow. I did a little to try to get someone to buy, but I ended up just getting a few Johns high before we got down to business. It was a great night to sling ass, but I got rolled." He ran a hand through his hair and stared back from whence they came. Wasn't paying attention. "How much do you owe him?" He hung his head. "Too much. More than I can make back in the time he wants it." Lee pulled herself up and looked around them. "We have to get out of here. Out of the neighborhood. Out of town. Out of the state if we want to see tomorrow," he finished for her. She nodded. His cell phone buzzed twice in his pocket, and he pulled it out to read the incoming messages. "Oh, shit," he said, drawing the last word out in a groan. "What is it?" He tucked his phone away. "It's sunny. We need to get over there." Lee started to run before Josie did, but with the long strides of a would-be professional football player, he easily caught up and overtook her. "It's Eddie?" she asked through a puff of breath. Sonny said she just got off the phone with him. He was fucking livid. "We have to get there before he does." She bent her head and put all her fury into her pumping legs. She knew that if they didn't get there in time, the sadistic drug dealer would make short work of dismantling the fast-talking exotic dancer. "This way," he said, and led her down an alley. Lee struggled to keep up and was almost on his heels in the tight space when he flew out onto the street. She skidded to a stop, and her ears filled with the sound of screeching tires. "Josie!" Josie lay crumpled on the street. Lee ran to him as the car door flew open and a woman scrambled out onto the street. They met over his body, a mess of tangled limbs. The woman crouched, her face contorted into a mask of horror and shame. "Where did you even come from? Oh, God, we have to get you to a hospital." Lee waved her hand in front of his face. "Josie, are you with me? Say something." "Back off," he whispered, and both women pulled back. "I need some air." One arm craned slowly toward his hip, and he hissed a string of obscenities. "What the hell happened?" "You ran in front of a car," Lee said. "I didn't see you," the other woman said, and buried her face in her hands. "I wasn't paying attention." "Neither were we," Lee said. She gingerly pulled Josie's shirt up and winced at the bruises that had already blossomed in his midsection. "Do you think anything's broken, Joe?" He moaned. "I'm pretty sure my fucking leg is shattered," he said through gritted teeth. "Let me take you to a hospital," the woman said, and stood up. Josie grabbed her by the ankle, and she froze in place. "No." He turned his gaze on Lee. "We have to get to Sonny. If we don't hurry, a broken leg won't be the worst thing that happens today." Lee nodded, then turned to the driver. "Can you help me get him to the car?" The woman looked from one to the other like they had just grown extra heads. "He could have internal bleeding, and his leg is broken. He needs a hospital." Lee stood up and faced the woman. She grabbed her hand, pulled her closer, and met her eyes. "You don't understand. If we don't get there soon, our friend could end up in the morgue." The driver pulled back as if she had been slapped. "Call the cops." From his prone position, Josie chuckled then swore. "The cops don't help us. We're street trash. And so is Sonny. That's why we have to help her." He pushed himself up to a sitting position and belched out hot acid as Lee walked to the car and got in on the passenger side. Then you can take me to the hospital, he said with a grimace. The woman turned to stare at Josie, then glanced at the car. Please, don't make me do this. I don't want to get tangled up in someone else's mess. She squinted at Lee as she rifled around inside her car and took a step forward. What are you doing? Lee grabbed a hunk of cold, dark metal from the glove box and hauled herself back out of the car. The driver sucked in a breath and let out a horrified groan. Listen, you hit my friend with your car, Lee said. She held the gun pointed directly at the driver. The least you can do is help us save the friend we were going to help when you derailed us. Damn girl, Josie said. He slid himself across the pavement inch by inch until he was near enough the car's hood to get a grip. Can I get a hand up? He asked. Lee gestured for the woman to help Josie up as she bridged the gap. She was much smaller than him, but stronger than she looked, and with the help of Lee's free arm, the two managed to get him up onto his good leg and into the back seat of the car. Lee wagged the gun at the driver's side. Get in. Inside, Lee let out a sigh. You couldn't just do this the easy way, could you? She buckled her seatbelt with her free hand, the gun still trained on the driver as she cautiously buckled herself in and started the car. I can't get a brake, the woman whispered as she glanced in her mirrors, then eased the car around to drive the opposite direction. Hey, you take us to help our friend, then to the hospital, and you'll never see us again, Lee said. A police car sped past them, all sirens and lights, and Josie swore. What the hell was that? Chapter 5. Ruby shook in the driver's seat. Behind her, a large man in yoga pants and a lollipop t-shirt bled onto her seats and gave her directions. Beside her, a woman about her size with shaggy hair and dark, haunted eyes held a gun on her. She said a silent prayer to something she didn't know she believed in, that she would survive the night. They passed a burning building where a fire truck, ambulance, and police car congregated. Their lights flashed, but their sirens were dead quiet. Well, we won't be going home again, the woman beside her muttered. The man in the back seat snorted. Like we want to. As long as Eddie wants my ass on a platter, we wouldn't be safe there anyway. The woman with the gun let out a long sigh. I hope Sonny's okay. Don't hold your breath, the man said, and reached a hand out to put it on the woman's shoulder. Sorry I started this. It's not your fault, Josie, the woman answered. She didn't take her eyes off the road, but she put her free hand on his. You didn't have a choice. I chose to take the stuff to the party. The woman snorted and turned just far enough to look at him in the back seat. Did you choose to be robbed? You were robbed? Ruby asked, and both sets of eyes landed on her. She wished she could take it back, or crawl into the floorboard and out of sight. Anything to avoid the expressions of scrutiny now leveled on her. Yeah, he answered after a long pause. And now a psycho is after me and my friends. Turn here, he said, and pointed one scuffed but manicured finger at the next cross street. Sorry, Ruby said, and followed his directions. Soon they pulled into the dark parking lot of a building whose occupants were mostly outside. In various states of dress and intoxication, the residents watched as the building a few streets down burned to the ground with little help from the on-scene firefighters. I don't think I can go, Josie said. His partner turned to Ruby. Leave the keys and come with me. Why? I'm not going anywhere. The woman pushed the gun closer to Ruby's ribs, and she winced. Please, I swear. Don't make me use this thing. Ruby nodded, unbuckled her seatbelt, and got out of the car. She reached for the keys by instinct. Leave the keys. The woman with the gun unbuckled her seatbelt. I'll be right back, she said to the man she called Josie, then got out of the car. They closed the doors, and the woman checked the safety on the gun, then tucked it into her waistband. Let's go. They pushed past the crowd of people fire-gazing and into the building. Inside, they could hear the steady thump of loud music from above. As they ascended the stairs, Ruby chanced to look at her abductor. Her jaw was set in a hard line, and the muscle twitched with the force of her clench. She was about the same size as Ruby, but there was something much stronger about her, as if she had been cut from a more rugged cloth. The woman walked past another door, and Ruby cleared her throat. "What floor are we going to?" "6th," the woman answered without a glance at her. They continued on for another flight, when out of nowhere the woman tossed an arm across her body to stop Ruby in her tracks. Ruby opened her mouth to question her, but the woman put a finger to her lips. In the distance, Ruby heard heavy footfalls above them and the sound of men's laughter. The woman pulled Ruby into a door, then put her ear against it. As the voices got closer, Ruby could hear snippets of the conversation, and it made her stomach turn. "She got blood all over me." Laughter and stomping feet. "Did you see that slut's face when she saw it?" Ruby watched the face of her captor contort in fury. The woman reached for the doorknob, and Ruby caught her hand. The two locked eyes for a moment, balled fists and soft palm, until the men had passed. "We need to go help your friend," Ruby whispered when the voices had faded. The woman let out a loud breath, jerked open the door, and got back on the stairs. In a few minutes they were at the door, and the woman stopped with her hand poised above the doorknob. "I don't know what we're going to see." Ruby nodded, and the woman turned the knob. Already, a few nosy neighbors had opened their doors. As they got closer, the woman sped up until she was almost at a full run. A few of Sunny's neighbors had their doors open, but only one had her head out. She was talking fast and loud into an old-style cordless phone. When she saw them, she covered the mouthpiece and motioned them over. "Lee, come." "What happened?" Ruby's captor asked. The old woman shook her head gravely. "Sunshine was attacked." "Stay here." As her captor rushed past the door, Ruby threw caution to the wind and followed her into the apartment of her old friend. When the young woman got to the bathroom, she stopped short at the door just before a congealing pool of blood. The woman Ruby assumed was Sunny lay half naked on the uneven tiles, her body bruised and swelling fast. Even from a few feet away, Ruby could see the boot prints as they began to show purple on her ribs. She bled from every visible orifice. "Sunny." The exotic dancer's bloodshot eyes rolled slowly up to meet hers. Ruby's captor bent down close and rubbed one hand over Sunny's sweat-damp hair. "Lee? Who did this to you?" "Run." Fluid rattled in Sunny's lungs, and she coughed weakly. "They're looking for you and Josie." "I know. I'm sorry." "Go. Hurry." Boots ran up behind them, and Lee jumped onto her feet, her fists balled for a fight. She spun to face the goons and found the paramedics standing behind her. "Whoa, easy," the woman in front of her said. "We're here to help." Lee stepped out of the way and watched as the paramedics checked Sunny's vital signs and covered her nudity. One tried to pull Lee aside, but she brushed his hand away. "We'd like to ask you about your friend," he said. Lee shook her head. "I just got here. You know as much as I do. You need to help her. She's dying." "Lee?" Ruby said. Her captor turned and met her eyes. For a moment, Ruby saw inside the gruff exterior, past the gun, the threats, and the swagger. Then Lee's eyes hardened again, blackened like a shark's eyes, and she pulled Ruby by the hand away from the carnage in her friend's bathroom. Ruby bumped up against the table with a hip. She grabbed a picture frame just before it fell and righted it before Lee gave her hand another tug. As they breached the doorway, Lee forced them both into a jog. "We have to get the fuck out of here," was all she managed in way of explanation. Ruby matched her pace and squeezed her fingers in support as the two ran down the stairs and out of the building toward the safety of Ruby's car. This is Adan Ramie reading a section from my book, Maladaptation.
This was an episode of Book Clips. Check out the show notes for more on this book. And it would be great if you would rate the show and subscribe to the Lesbian Talk Show podcast channel for more woman-centered content. If you are an author of lesbian fiction, then send us your reading. You can find out how on the lesbiantalkshow.com/reading.